You see this? You see this? You don't need it. You don't need it. I'm gonna tell you why. Here's a list of musicians that could not read music. Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Wonder, Hans Zimmer, Irving Berlin, Dave Brubeck, Taylor Swift, Bob Dylan, Aretha Franklin, The Beatles, not a single one of them, Eric Clapton, Elvis Presley, and Prince. Now these legendary musicians, some who are still with us and some who are not, could not read music at all. Not a lick. You could put their own music in front of them, and they couldn't read it. Now look, before a bunch of you guys go and do some research and say, I read a thing that said this guy did something with music theory or he knew something about... Look, here's the point. All these musicians did not have their knowledge of music notation at the center of what they did. They may all have varying degrees of experience with understanding what they're playing in some kind of traditional context, in some kind of academic way, but reading music was not what motivated them musically. That's the point. So what is the point? It's simply that to be a great musician, you don't need to read music. Now, you may want to read music, but we'll talk about that later. Now, most of us think of being a musician as playing an instrument, but there are loads of things you can do other than play an instrument in music. Here's some other things you could do without reading music. A composer, who is someone who writes their own original music. Now, before you think this is impossible, you should hear the story of Irving Berlin. The Tin Pan Alley composer wrote classic songs like There's No Business Like Show Business, Blue Skies, and Alexander's Ragtime Band. However, Berlin never learned to read music and had such a limited ability on the piano that he could only play in the key of F sharp. Many of his songs modulate to different keys, so to make up for his inability to play in those other keys, he had his pianos fitted with a special lever that would transpose the piano for him. That's totally amazing and so inspiring on so many levels. I mean levels. Also, Dave Brubeck. He was accepted to study music in college, but was nearly expelled when one of his professors discovered that he couldn't read music. The school agreed to let him graduate only after he promised never to teach piano. That's rough. He went on to compose some songs you may have heard before, like Take 5 or Blue Rondo a la Turk, songs that brought odd meters into jazz. The amazing thing is he didn't understand how to write out the time signatures he was writing in. He didn't know that it was 5/4, but he felt it. It made sense to him. It was in here and it was in here. So that proves the point. You don't need to be able to notate it, you just need to feel it. You could also be a songwriter, someone who writes songs. Now, songwriters and composers are obviously similar. They both basically do the same thing. They create original music. But songwriters, we think more of somebody like Taylor Swift or Paul McCartney, and we think of a composer as somebody more like a John Williams or a Hans Zimmer or a Beethoven. Although, both sides are composing and writing songs. They go together. You get it. This could surprise some people, but there are plenty of songwriters out there that can't read music, and some of them can't even sing the songs that they write. But some of these songwriters are some of the most successful in the industry, living in Nashville, LA, working with major artists. And the reason why they're still successful is because they understand, again, music in here. They understand lyrics, they understand rhythm and song structure and how melodies should go. And they know how to write catchy tunes, and they're just great at it because it's in here. That's more important than being able to write it. Music is ultimately not on the page, it's out here. It's in the air, it's in our hearts, it's in our minds, and you can be successful in music if you have that, period. If you don't read music or understand music theory, you could be a film composer, which is someone who creates the musical score that accompanies a film, which is called the film score. Now, many people would assume, and rightfully so, that you need to be able to notate the music you write for film, especially if you're writing orchestral works. But then you hear about people like Hans Zimmer. Now, he has become one of the most well-known film composers in history, but his compositional ability doesn't come from understanding notation or music theory, but it comes from his technological prowess. He relies heavily on his knowledge of synthesizers, sampled bass instruments, and other recording technology to compose his music. And once again, he's another very talented guy that spent a lot of time studying music and understanding it in an intuitive way, so he can compose without having to understand even what chord he's playing, or how it actually fits into an orchestration. The other reason he can get away with that is because he has a whole team of orchestrators and arrangers that do a lot of that work for him. So when he needs something to be orchestrated, he doesn't have to worry about that part. He can just do the creative songwriting part. And look, this isn't a negative against Hans. It's really a compliment because it shows he's a great leader. He knows his strengths, he plays to those strengths, and then he brings people around him to complement them. He's a great leader because he built a great team. You could put many, many more electronic-based musicians in this same category as Hans. These types of composers are sitting down in front of a computer and working in a DAW rather than writing something down or writing in front of a keyboard. Now, you might call some of these musicians button pushers or not real musicians, but they still create compelling music. And to me, that's all that matters. If you're creating great music, who cares how you made it? You don't need to read music to be an arranger, which is someone who adapts a composition to fit a medium other than that for which it was originally written. That would mean you take an existing song and change some element of the song, whether it be harmonic, rhythmic, style, maybe a whole group of those things, and you make it your own. This could be done in a band setting by ear, which means each player contributes from their own instrument. So, again, you could do a whole arrangement of a song. You could take a rap song and make it a rock song. You could take an opera and make it sound like EDM. You could do any crazy thing you want, but as long as you're either doing it yourself and you understand what you're doing intuitively, or you're in a band setting with other musicians who learn well by ear, you can construct arrangements without being able to notate it, or without understanding the harmonic structure, the rhythm, what other instruments are doing. It's not important. Really, it's just like if it sounds good, it is good. Another career path is a performer, or I'll extend that to be an artist. So to be a performing artist or a performer, somebody like a Taylor Swift or an Elvis or whatever, yeah, do those people need to read music? No, because they're Taylor Swift and they're Paul McCartney and they're whoever. It's like it's not important. They write compelling music and they're great performers, and that's all they need to be able to do because that's the role they play. Again, I'll say it again because I can't say it enough. There are people that do the other things that work with them. You know, you couldn't have an orchestra with somebody like an Elvis if you didn't have somebody orchestrating for them. But this is the part of the video where I flip things around on you and I say, there are some situations where you need to learn to read music, and by association, you should know music theory too. Okay, so obviously most people know that reading music is like a good skill to have, but what are some actual careers that you need this skill for? You may not know. So, you probably need to read music and understand music theory if you want to be any of these things. An orchestrator, someone who composes or arranges music for an orchestra. Now this sort of encompasses an arranger as well, but again, it depends on what you want to do. If you're somebody like Hans and you have a team of people to write your ideas out for an orchestra, you maybe don't need to do that. But for a lot of us out there, say you're going to arrange a piece of music of your own for a big band, or you're going to rearrange something in a different style for a string ensemble, something like that. We probably don't all have the resources to just pawn off all the arranging and orchestration to other people, which is why if you want to do this professionally, you want to be making money doing this, you really need to learn how to write the parts yourself. You need to understand what you're writing. You need to be able to notate it. Again, I know this is kind of confusing because there are definitely situations out there where people are doing these things and don't understand what they're writing, but I'm trying to put you in a real-world context here, which is, for the most part, to write for an orchestra, you need to have gone through a traditional music education. You need to have transcribed full orchestral arrangements. You need to look at the scores, understand how to write for those instruments, how they're supposed to sound, the ranges of the instrument, what's typical to be played on that instrument, what's hard to play, what's easy to play, what sounds good, what maybe wouldn't sound as good on that instrument. And you need to understand how chords work, how to voice chords for each section, for the orchestra together. These are all just things that orchestrators learn when they study, and you may be able to teach this for yourself, but most of the people out there that have learned to do this went through a traditional music education, they went to college for it, they studied with masters at the craft, and that's how they got good at it. Another career in which you need to read music probably is to be a studio musician. Now once again, this one has exceptions. I've heard of people saying there are studio musicians out there that don't read music, they don't read chord charts, they learn everything by ear before they go in there, and they work that way. But again, kind of like orchestrators that can't read music or notate parts for an orchestra, that's rare. And I would really say very hard to be successful if you're that way. Think about it. If you go into a studio Or you move to, let's say you move to a Nashville or an LA and you want to work as a studio musician. If you go into a session and there's someone that pops a chord chart down in front of you and says, hey, I know I sent you a recording, but I made some tweaks and we're going to put this intro here now and this chorus is going to be double and we're changing the key and okay, as long as that's good. And you're like, huh? I can't do this. Why can't we play what you sent me? Think about that. There are loads of other situations like that, but the ability to read allows you to be flexible. It also allows you to communicate in the studio. If you understand notation and say you're the keyboard player, and the bass player is doing something that doesn't jive with you, you can be like, hey, I'm actually playing this change right there. Let's listen to that. Let's play that. And I think it's actually like a B flat thing instead of this other thing you're playing. And you guys try it, and boom, it's fixed that fast. But if you have to be like, hey, well, it doesn't really sound right, and the bass player's like, well, what should I play? And you're like, I don't know. You don't want to be in that situation. You're not going to be supportive as one of the musicians in the studio that way, especially if it's an artist or some other performer's project that does bring that kind of Elvis thing where it's like, hey, I'm the star. I don't know nothing about actual making music and stuff, but I just write the songs and I sing them. So it's your guys' job to take this stuff and make it sound good. That's why you need to know. That's why you need to understand some theory, some notation, and be able to get in there. You can read Nashville numbers, you can read chord charts, you can read staff, you can read traditional music notation. The more you do, the better you'll be. Another thing that you probably need to be able to read and understand theory for is to be a band director. Now, this one is probably a little bit self-explanatory because if you're going to teach kids at any level, all the way up to adult, you need to learn how to read music because reading music is at the forefront, at the beginning of every musician's journey. None of us went through traditional band in school without learning to read music first. Now, a lot of times this is a little backwards because we really should be learning how to play by ear too, but notation and sometimes understanding theory is always important in pedagogy in general. You might think you'd make a great teacher, and you could get some jobs teaching musicians only by ear. So after all that, there's probably one question on your mind. What do I actually need to be a great musician? What is essential for me to have? Well, let's define musician. The ability to play a musical instrument or instruments. Now, many of the musicians on this list play more than one instrument, and as a multi-instrumentalist myself, I will say the more you play, the better. It just will make you better at music, period. The more instruments you understand, that's just how it is. Now, you might also be saying, oh, but you said there are songwriters that don't even play an instrument and they don't even sing the songs they write, and Irving Berlin played in only one key and Dave Brubeck didn't, and blah, blah, blah. Look, you need to learn an instrument. But I would say if you don't play an instrument and you have ideas in your head that you want to get out, learn piano. And maybe I'm biased because I'm a piano player. I don't care. It's the most important instrument to learn. You can work out melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic ideas very easily. You can block out your progressions, hear how that sounds against your melody. If you're a vocalist and you want to write a song, you can start to block out chord changes and be singing. You can create so freely on a keyboard. To start wrapping this up, here's my opinion. The best musicians are complete musicians. That means they do it all. They learn by ear, they can play by ear, they compose by ear, but they can also read and write their own music and other people's music as well. Take someone like Duke Ellington, one of the greatest, if not the all-time greatest American composer. He started out learning by ear and taught himself a lot and learned theory and notation later on. Much of his skills were self-taught as he did not go to college for music. Of course, he was a visionary, an immense one-of-a-kind talent, but his journey should give inspiration to the rest of us who are looking for it. Here's your big takeaway. Don't let anyone tell you you can't be something in music, because if you play by ear, that's great. If you only read music, that's great. If you do a bit of both, that's even better. But the point is, there isn't one list. There isn't one short list of skills you need to be successful in music. All you need is for it to be in here. You have to have this part. And to be a little bit more practical, you need to think about what kind of musician you want to be, what do you want your career to be, and then you need to gain the proper skills to fulfill that career. Here's a quote from John Lennon about his experience with the Beatles that I feel like really brings this home. None of us could read music. None of us can write it. But as pure musicians, as inspired humans to make the noise, they, as in Paul and Ringo, are as good as anybody. Thanks for watching, everyone. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, click here for more videos like this, and go to sweetwater.com for all of your music instrument and pro audio needs.